Welcome back to the round 4 of the US Chess Championships that saw only one decisive result in the open section and a lot of decisive results in the women's section. I will show you 3 games for today that I thought were the highlights. Well, first, Hans Niemann wins against Sam Shankland with the black color. And this is what standings look like now. Wesley So is still in the lead, and Hans closes the distance, now tied second place with Fabiano Caruana and Levon Aronian. In the women's section, we have Anna Sargysyan continuing the streak. She's now 3.5 out of 4 games and has the full point lead. Today she was able to win against Megan Paragua. That is going to game that we are going to see. Without further ado, let's get to it. First, we are going to start with Hans's game. Hans won in a very convincing fashion. There were a few moments when Sam Shankland could have improved his play, but it was not easy. So let's see how it went down. Sam starts with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, and we have Nimzo Indian on the board. Bishop goes to b4, pawn to e3. Short castle, bishop d3. Nothing new so far. This is called, chess.com calls it a normal line. Pawn goes to d5, c takes d5, e takes d5, and pawn to a3. Now white wants to encourage black to capture on c3, but Hans decides to retreat back, bishop d6. Now queen goes to c2 and knight a6. Not super unknown move, but also not the mainstream theory here. Usually the main line here is either c6 or b6 or even a6. Out of 141 master games, knight a6 has only been played 16 times. Knight goes to a6 here, preparing c5. White continues the development normally with knight f3 and pawn c5, challenging the center immediately. So the idea of knight a6 becomes clear. Now black wants to capture on c5 with the knight, and he's not worried about bishop a6 ruining the pawn structure, because this light squared bishop is going to be too high of a cost. Short castle, pawn goes to c4, bishop retreats back to e2, and usually this c4 push is always an indication that black is trying to play for the advantage here. Otherwise, it does offer an imbalanced game. Now knight c7 with the idea of pushing b5 on the next move. White stops that with a4, and now knight returns back to a6 to come to b4. Pawn goes to b3, knight goes to b4, queen returns back to b1. Now this pawn has to be traded, otherwise this was hanging. And after queen b3, we have imbalance of the pawn structure. White's pawn structure is supposed to be a little better here because of the only 2 pawn island. Pawn island is basically when the pawns are connected here, and black has 3 pawn islands. However, black knight on b4 does give black a lot of active play, and most likely it is going to be supported in the next few moves. So bishop comes to f5 with targeting c2 square. Pawn goes to a5 to stop black from playing a5, and now rook gets on c8. Bishop to d2. So far everything is covered, and apparently a6 here was white's chance to grab the advantage, and that would be with knight b5. However, knight b5 is not an easy move to see, because knight would go to c2 most likely, then knight takes d6 here, and some tactics to follow. Knight takes a1, attacking the queen, but the key move here apparently was queen takes b7, and the point is, if you take the knight, then bishop goes to b4, pinning the queen and the rook. And when you move back, for example, d7 or b8, after the trade, bishop takes f8, and rook takes the knight. White regains all the material and remains extra pawn up. So knight b5 was white's chance, but Sam Shankland goes for g3, probably was not able there to figure out the complications until the end. So if you don't see that variation there, now g3 I think makes a lot of sense. Queen goes to e7. Now that idea of knight b5 is going to be stopped because Hans brings additional defender to this knight on b4, rook fc8 and rook c7 to double up the rooks. Queen b2. Apparently this was first real inaccuracy in the white's play, something like bishop d1 maybe, but already black is looking quite comfortable and quite active here. So after queen b2, knight c2 is allowed, and the point is that after queen takes c2 here, there's going to be bishop b4, pinning the knight and winning the knight. So knight g4 was played. White sacrifices an exchange here. Also, if white plays something like rook a2, for example, there's bishop a3 again, winning an exchange. So the move won an exchange. However, this game is far from over here. Knight g4. The idea of knight g4 is to loosen this d5 pawn while he wants to take on f6 and then takes on d5. Bishop returns back to e4, and after knight takes f6, g takes f6. Computer apparently likes taking there with the queen. I'm not sure what Hans did not like, because I think black ends up a comfortable exchange up. So maybe bishop g4 was something that he didn't like, or was it f3? Maybe it was f3 actually. Probably the point is that if you take, there is going to be rook f1, winning that bishop. However, the key move here apparently was queen to g5, and if you take on e4, there's going to be apparently rook takes c3 tactic, and if you take bishop c3, queen takes e3, then rook takes c3, and black sacrifices an exchange, but the king is weakened. Now entire white's position here is kind of loose. So computer says black has a decisive advantage as much as -4. Okay, so probably queen g5 I think was overlooked by Hans. So instead he takes back with the g pawn. Bishop goes to g4. Now that is according to computer slight inaccuracy, but now if you play f3, there is bishop b4 attacking this knight on c3. So bishop g4 was played, and after f5, bishop returns back to e2, threatening now f3. But h5, the point of h5 is, again, if you play f3, there is bishop b4. Why sacrifice the pawn on h5? Let's see. So after bishop takes h5, simply king goes to g7. I'm assuming that now rook wants to be brought to the h file for the counterplay there. h4, now rook to c6. And we have a position where white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns, and black has how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So minor piece and the pawn for the exchange. Knight takes e4, f takes e4, rook b1, putting the pressure on the pawn. On b7, apparently now the critical move was bishop takes g3 and then rook takes h4 with the idea of rook g6, and if you play king f1, queen f6, and there's going to be a mate. Even though white has 2 extra minor pieces, king is left defenseless. These bishops are blocking the route of the queen. So bishop g3 would be a very nice tactic here, but Hans goes for another sacrifice, which is rook takes h4, queen takes h4, and now wants to move the bishop somewhere and then swing the rook across the 6th rank. So white tries to run away with the king to f1, and we have so-called brilliancy on the board. Bishop goes to g3, targeting the f2 pawn, threatening rook f6. Bishop e1 to defend the pawn. Now rook goes to f6, queen goes to c1, queen h1 check, king tries to run away, but it's not gonna go too far. After bishop f2 here, the e1 and e3 are targets, and after bishop e2, bishop takes e3, sacrificing the bishop again, but that bishop cannot be captured because of the checkmate, so king has to go to d1. What a turn of events. From being an exchange up, now black is down a piece with a lot of prospects to attack. And white king is the one that is feeling uncomfortable. A few moves later, that would be crazy thought here, especially having g file open and pawns on f7 and f6 there. However, black does have 3 pawns for the piece, so technically black is still in driver's seat here. After queen g1, queen c8 apparently is a mistake. Taking immediately here on b7 would have made more sense according to the computer. So why is queen c8 a mistake? Well, because now there will be bishop f2, and point is after queen g4 apparently rook g6, and white would love to trade queens, but not in these circumstances, because after e3 black is gonna win this minor piece back, and the resulting bishop opposite color bishop endgame should be winning for black due to the connected passers and a bunch of extra pawns here. So bishop f2 would be decisive, but as fate would have it, move 40th was a mistake here. Hans had 4 minutes left on the clock, so he probably tried to keep it simple here and get the time control passed by. Just to remind you, after 40 moves, players get an additional 30 minutes, I believe. Is it 30 or 40 minutes? So bishop goes to g5, rook b7, then bishop h4, and now queen g4 trades queens here in the right way. After rook f1, apparently bishop e6, and now white is very close to equality here. Had he played king to d2. Why king d2? So Sam played king to c2. Now the difference is basically if you go king to d2, there would be e3, king d3, and now f7 and d5 pawns are both hanging. And if you defend it, then let's say, well, king e3, actually there's rook e1, but bishop d5 first. And apparently this endgame is very close to being drawish. For example, rook f2, apparently rook b1, and black is gonna have trouble making progress here. So most likely, game's gonna end up in a draw. King c2 is a mistake which gives black here now decisive advantage, and after pawn e3, then rook d2 check, pawn to e2, and black wins a minor piece. White has to sacrifice the bishop because otherwise this pawn would promote. So after rook takes e2, there is still 1 pawn left for black, so it's going to be relatively easy conversion. Black consolidates and then wins the d5 pawn or d pawn, which decides the game and prompts Shankland to resign. Very well fought game by Hans, and a very well deserved victory, in my opinion. Now, I want to show you also the game between Andy Woodward and Awonder Liang. Andy has not been having a very good tournament. Going into this round, he was half a point out of 3 games. And in this round, he's playing Awonder, recently 2700 player. Okay, and very solid. So game starts as the Catalan. And the main line pretty much, the Catalan declines, or the closed Catalan so-called. Knight b7, bishop f4, b6. Andy played this quite fast, taking on d5, bringing the rook on c1. After knight h5, queen to a4. You can see on the clock that Andy still is playing on an increment, which means that he is familiar with the position. And after a bunch of trades here, white is supposedly slightly better, okay, because probably knights are better in this position than the bishop, and also the c file is going to be the big factor. White is going to be the one who has the control of the c file, especially after this move knight c7. The idea now is going to be to attack the rook. There's a very nice tactic. If, for example, if you go rook a7 to attack it, knight d5, attacking the rook on c8 and the bishop on e7. So rook goes to b8, rook c6, and white is going to be the one who doubles up on the c file and takes charge. Now, is that going to be enough for the decisive advantage? So apparently the move here was knight c5, but it does feel a little weird to disturb the coordination between two rooks here. However, according to computer, this would give white a very dangerous pawn on the c file. And then with the moves like knight e5, knight e5, knight d3, white would have very good chances of converting this. However, knight e5 is an understandable move. Knight are traded off the board, d takes e5, and now white has here still a very comfortable advantage, but since there are not that many targets in the black's position, only the fact that this bishop is not a great piece is not gonna make it easy for white. Okay, and apparently this was another chance here. f5 would have probably be a better chance after d4 here, probably something like knight b5. If you take on c6, then takes back, rook d7, now knight d6, king h7, maybe like king f3, and let's say if you play f6, king e4, here knight b5, still very close to equality. Okay, so it's not so easy to break through here. So Andy makes an inaccuracy with g5, which now is going to allow the rook to get very active from the second rank, and in return Andy wins the e6 pawn, but now this b pawn is going to be very annoying and very uncomfortable to deal with. And that was actually the factor here. Now this b pawn wants to be promoted, basically any rook move. Now Andy tries to push his e pawn for the counterplay, and apparently this was the chance for black. Now tables have turned here, and if Awonder simply moved the rook anywhere, this would be winning for black, because after rook g7, king h5, rook g5, let's say here knight f5, king h7, rook g7 check, king h8, and black escapes from the checks. And now on the next move, black is going to promote, and let's say after rook b1, e7, simply rook b8, stopping the pawn, and black is up a rook. So I'm not sure what players missed here. Very unusual in my opinion. Awonder plays g6, tries to keep this g pawn. I am not sure what he missed in this position. Why not simply move the rook? But honestly, I'm quite happy with that. As you may have known from the previous videos, Andy is Dallas native, and I've had the pleasure of working with him for quite some time, and I am cheering for him in this tournament, and not only in this tournament, but overall. So g6 was played, knight c2, and this allows white to get back on time, basically kick the bishop away. So now rook doesn't have time to basically slide because of the knight a3. So bishop returns back to e7. Obviously rook e7 is not happening because of rook g1, and then promotes the pawn to a queen and wins the game. So knight d4, then bishop f6, and now since there is no way to move the rook without losing the b2 pawn, black tries to get as much material for it as possible, and those would be two pawns after giving up both e pawns, but white is going to win the d5 pawn, and game fizzles out into equality. Knight f5 was a nice touch here. If you take rook d5, then knight e3 fork, and let's say if you take there, knight takes rook, and king being in front of the pawn here, this is going to be an easy draw. After king, let's say, stays on g2, black is not gonna be able to kick that king out. So after rook h2 here, there were a few more moves made, but with only one pawn and rooks and one minor piece, it is going to be impossible to make progress, and players agree to draw few moves later. Now this is actually very nice here. If you are not familiar with the fee leader position, that's the case here. After king f3, rook to f8. Well, the original fielder position would be if the rook was, let's say, on b8. Now, since the rook is on e8, white is not able to check from here. Let's see, actually, let's learn this. For example, if this was the case, this is the original fielder position, and the point is, if king crosses here, goes forward, then there will be, for example, check from here. Now, if king goes to g3, then rook goes to g8 check. Now the original fielder position actually is something like this here. Rook goes to c3, cutting the king from crossing the third rank, and then when you play f3, rook goes back, and then white keeps checking the king from the behind, and black is not going to be able to avoid checks. So this is going to end up in a draw. Okay, so this is the true fielder position. But this is also going to be draw quite easily, because king now is able to hide on the h file, and this is called a rook, king on the short side, and black is gonna have difficulty pushing this pawn. So trusting in this technique, players agreed on a draw. So probably a little disappointing that Andy was not able to push a little more out of the opening, what seemed to be his preparation, but we could also be happy that he was able to hold the draw, because at one point here, namely in this position, if rook moved anywhere, I think there is very likely that Andy would have lost. So a little bit of advantage in the opening, then he was losing, and eventually game ended in a draw. So that is an open section. Now I'll show you one more game from the women's section. The leader of the tournament was able to cruise here through her game, and not with some crazy preparation, but poor play. After g3, close Sicilian here, then pawn goes to e5, and it is safe to say that we are already on the territory of outside of the traditional theory, but as we will see from relatively equal position, white was able to outplay her opponent here already after a4 a5 move. Pawn structure, black's pawn structure is fixed. Now c5 pawn is going to be the weakness. I think this idea of bishop d6, bishop c7 was not that great in general. Probably a simple developing move, knight d7 here would make more sense. Try to trade some pieces of the board. So after bishop d6, bishop c7 here, we see that white is already very comfortable. This c5 pawn is going to be pain to defend, and that's exactly what happens here. Pawn to b3, this bishop is going to come on this diagonal, and now the pawn on c5 is in trouble. That is what happens, and white wins a pawn here, and the position also starts to flow. Okay, well, not trade screen immediately, actually. Brings the knight back, then knight e4 here. Pawn is I thought it was going to go to c4, but I think that is going to come in a little bit. Now queen g5, threatening all kinds of threats here. It has to return back, then c4, bishop d8 to attack the queen, and now is the time to offer trades. Bishops, light square bishops get traded, which also weakens the c6 pawn. Then knights are traded off the board, and white keeps an extra pawn. Also, as you can see, she has huge advantage on the clock already, 43 minutes versus 6 minutes. So that was too much to handle for young and very talented player Megan Paragua. Rook to h4 now. White brings the rook, doubles up the rooks on the h file. Then I believe here there's going to be a lot of threats, namely I think rook f3 would probably be decisive, but this move queen e5 check also forces f6, because otherwise there would be checkmate. So after f6, rook takes f6. The point is, after queen f6, rook goes to h7, winning the queen, and white did give up 2 rooks for the queen, but grabbed a pawn in return. So since white was already up a pawn, now queen and 2 pawns plus all black pawns are extremely weak here. So added with the fact that the king is also exposed, this is going to be easy conversion for white. 2 rooks without any hopes of a pass pawn is simply not enough to oppose the queen, right? So Anna Sargysyan increases her chances of winning the US Women's Championship at first try. I believe this is her first showing at the US Championships. She just transferred federations from Armenia, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see how next, how many rounds is left? 5 to 11. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games to go still. We're gonna have a rest day tomorrow, so players are going to be able to recharge. Let's take a look actually the standings. Apparently Alice Lee, Nazi Baigidze, and Anna Zatonsky are trailing Anna Sargysyan, and the defending champion Karisa Ip is having a difficult time. She does not have a single win so far in the tournament. So we'll see. We'll see how the second leg of the tournament plays out. All right. Let me know what you think of the games. Do consider subscribing if you like this analysis, and if you would like to see more, or simply if you would like to support me. That's all I have for today. I'll see you in round 5 after a break tomorrow. So day after tomorrow. Cheers, guys.